Günther Jikeli is here, and he's going to speak on anti-Semitism among Muslims in Europe. And I'm just going to speak for a brief moment. I had sort of an intense 10 days or so I just want to touch on it. Some of you know that I was there. I went to Rwanda. It was the 20th anniversary of the genocide in Rwanda. And there was an international conference for memory in Kigali, in the parliament. And I spoke there with a group of scholars and policymakers. And I just want to convey a very quick story to give you some food for thought. And I don't want to take away from Gunther's important lecture, but I just want to share this with you because I think it's important at many levels. In 2009, I spoke at the United Nations in Geneva. It was the Durban II conference. And the Durban II conference was in a panel discussion with legal scholars, including Erwin Kotler, who's the former Minister of Justice of Canada, and a human rights professor, law professor. And we spoke about incitement, international law and incitement. And we were speaking about how the Iranian revolutionary regime, not the people, but the regime, was inciting to genocide while it was trying to build, and is trying to build, a nuclear weapon. And we also spoke about how radical Islam, not Islam and not Muslims, but radical political Islam, was inciting to genocide against Jewish people. And I gave my talk there, and right after we were finished, it was on Yom HaShoah 2009. Yesterday I spoke at the United Nations in New York on Yom HaShoah. So in 2009, it was 2 hours before the president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, addressed the General Assembly in Geneva for the Durban II conference on Yom HaShoah. So there was a buzz in the building, and we had a lecture, and it was attended by a few hundred people. And I'd say about 100 of the 300 people in the room were from Iran, from guests of or workers with the regime. Anyways, as soon as I finished speaking, a group of Rwandans came to me and said, "We'd like to take you for a coffee." So I went. It turned out that there were a group of scholars and diplomats from the mission, the Rwandan mission in Geneva. They took me for a coffee in the cafeteria of the United Nations. And they basically said to me that, "Don't you understand what is happening to the Jews today in the Middle East and globally," this is 2009, "is exactly what happened to us. They were Tutsis, and for months, for years leading up to the genocide in Rwanda, Hutu extremists were calling them non-human derogatory names like cockroaches and the like. And they said that this incitement, this dehumanization, lay the groundwork for the genocide in Rwanda, and the protocols of the Elders of Zion and what happened to the Jews in Europe for years leading up to the Holocaust is exactly what happened to them. It's exactly what happened to the Jews of Europe." And they said, "Don't you understand? This is exactly what's happening to you again," 2009. And they made me promise, and this is why I'm repeating the story in part, that when I go back to the United States to tell the human rights community, to tell the academic community, and to tell the Jewish community that they have to become active. And this was a group of Rwandans making me promise to tell American Jews to do something, that they couldn't believe that American Jews were so educated, so integrated economically, successfully integrated, and yet they remained silent. And this is 2009. Fast forward, 2014, I had the great honor yesterday of being at the United Nations to speak on Yom HaShoah on a panel. And part of my speech was reading the headlines from Al Jazeera, from Al Haram, from The Guardian, from The Telegraph, from Le Monde, and the words apartheid and Israel were in the global international media of record because they were quoting a leader, a major leader in the free Western world. On Yom HaShoah, and I said in the United Nations, that's an abomination. And we are going to hear a very important analysis. I know the work of Gunther well. He's a leading scholar. We're going to hear what's going on in the ground in Europe, and it's very important research. And we have a tendency in this country to look at Europe, to look at the Middle East, and to look at the problems around the world. But there's something happening here. If a leader of Russia, of China, of England, of Germany stood up and said something similar, we would be outraged. And I'm amazed at the silence here. I'm a Canadian-Israeli scholar. I'm amazed. It's my humble opinion. So without further ado, it's really an honor.
Sorry,
Yes.
I don't know who you are. I'm not informed.
I'm sorry. My name is Charles Small. I'm the director of ISGAP, and ISGAP is running the program. Okay, so Gunther told me to cut short the introduction, so I will try to be brief. So Gunther is really, and I'm not saying this to be polite, a leading scholar from Europe. He earned his PhD at the Center for Research on Anti-Semitism at the Technical University of Berlin, which was one of the foremost centers on anti-Semitism, one of the first of not many. So it is and was an important center. Gunther is affiliated currently with the Moses Mendelssohn Center at the University of Potsdam and the group Société, Religion, La Cité, which is the CNRS, which is a prestigious research center in Paris. He was there actually from 2011 to 2012, and he served as an advisor on combating anti-Semitism to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. He has written on anti-Semitism widely, including discrimination of Muslims in Europe, issues of forced labor, and the perceptions of the Holocaust among Europeans. He recently published an important book entitled Perceptions of the Holocaust in Europe and Muslim Communities, which was published by Springer, an important publishing house in Germany. And his forthcoming book from the Indiana University Press is on Muslim anti-Semitism in Europe. He's currently spending the semester at Indiana University at the Justin Druck Family Visiting Scholarship Program at the ISGAP, and he's teaching a course there on anti-Semitism. So it's really a privilege and honor to have Gunther here with us this evening.
Thank you very much for this invitation. It's an honor to be invited to speak here, and Charles is one of the very few leading scholars working on anti-Semitism who take this that seriously, and I'm always surprised how few scholars take their research what they find that anti-Semitism is the wish for murder, that they often don't take it as serious as they should. So it's a great honor to speak here at this institute and in this place. I think we are few enough people to get into discussions. I won't run through all my presentation maybe, so I invite you to ask whenever you feel like that, and we can go into more discussions. I prepared some statistics and survey results and results from qualitative surveys, but please feel free to interrupt me and ask questions even during the lecture. I think that will be more lively. I think we have now a good hour, is that correct? Until, all right, good. So I want to talk about Europe and specifically anti-Semitism among Muslims in Europe. And I want to give you a little bit of background about Muslims in Europe. I don't know how familiar you are with Europe or with the different countries. There are Muslim minorities. Most Muslims in Europe live in one of the three countries, Germany, France, or the UK. And they have very different backgrounds. So in France, most of the Muslims, they come from North Africa or the parents or grandparents come from North Africa, to be more precise. In the UK, that is rather from Pakistan, Bangladesh, or India. In Germany, most of the Muslims have Turkish origin. What we can see also from it's mostly a result from the immigration background. That is, most Muslims came in the 70s and 80s to work in Europe and came from rather poor backgrounds. And today we can see that Muslims are disproportionately disadvantaged when it comes to housing, education, and also employment. But I think it's important to see that when we talk about Muslims in Europe, they have very different backgrounds ethnically, and also from the interpretation of Islam. So we have Shiites, we have Sunnis, we have Alevis, and it is, if we speak of the Muslims in Europe, we should think about the diversity of it. We have Islamist organizations in Europe, a number of them, many of them are influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood. That is due to the history of the last decades. Well, in fact, since the 1960s and even in some respects earlier. Often Islamist organizations present themselves as representative, but they are not. If you ask in surveys Muslims if they feel represented by Islamist organizations, they are not representative. But they are the most vocal and have influences in mosques and Muslim community centers and so on. So if we have a look on anti-Semitism, how do we establish the fact it's since about 15 years there's a rise of anti-Semitism in Europe, I would say, in all countries, in all European countries. And in Western Europe, there has been an ongoing debate where it's coming from, where the violent incidents are coming from. And there has been a discussion, ongoing discussion, that it's largely in part the perpetrators are often have Muslim or Arab background. But it is still contested to some point. We can look at surveys, we can look at statistics of perpetrators, and I want to show you some. This issue has not found much attention for many reasons, and maybe you are interested in discussing why there is a lack of attention by scholars and politicians on this particular issue. Generally, I just want to show you 2-3 survey results. Anti-Semitism in Europe is fairly high. These are results from the ADL that do every 2-3 years. They do surveys in different European countries, and here are the results from 3 countries. So you see that the show Jews have too much power in the business world is still popular, and you see here in these statistics staggering high in Hungary. Hungary is a very specific issue, and I won't talk about Hungary tonight. I will concentrate on Germany, France, and the UK because these are the 3 countries where most Muslims live. But even in these 3 countries, we have high anti-Semitic attitudes. Jews still talk too much about what happened to them in the Holocaust. It's also something what has been described as secondary anti-Semitism, a reaction to that in Germany, for example, Germans do not want to be reminded of the history of the nation, that they were responsible for the Holocaust, and therefore that might explain why it's particularly high in Germany here. 43% do believe that Jews still talk too much about what happened during the Holocaust. And for Germany, there has been there are often other surveys, and there has been a commission or an expert report, and it's estimated that about 20% of Germans can be considered to be anti-Semitic. Now, if we compare in surveys Muslims and non-Muslims, we can see there are different surveys. There are surveys comparing different countries, and surveys only in some of the countries or one country. And this is a survey which is a bit older, it's from 2006, but that had the question, do you have a positive or negative view on Jews? And there you see a staggering difference between Muslims and non-Muslims. So this is one point. There's another more recent from 2013, from last year. Another question: Jews cannot be trusted. Was there the question? And so in Belgium, that is BE, Belgium, Christians agreed, or 7% of the Christians agreed that Jews cannot be trusted, and more than half, the majority of Muslims in Belgium said Jews cannot be trusted. And in Germany it was 10% of Christians and 28% of Muslims, around 7% of Christians and 43% of Muslims said Jews cannot be trusted. So where is that coming from? Yes?
Are there any controls? I mean, what percentage of people in Belgium believe Armenians can't be trusted?
Sorry? Which percentage?
What percentage of people in Belgium believe Armenians can't be trusted?
Yeah,
There are no controls.
Yeah.
I don't know how this compares to their feelings.
yeah, you're right. No,
No,
that's
Q&A
right.
after.
No, that's fine. I'm happy to
It's
take
only
the
got
question.
questions in
You're
the
right.
middle.
You're right.
Seriously.
No, that's fine. This is, you can discuss surveys, and this is one of the disadvantages of these kind of surveys. We don't know how that compares to others.
A lot of these have no basis.
But this survey compares also to, I think, to how they view Christians. I don't have these statistics here, but I can tell it to you. But my point here is the difference between Muslims and non-Muslims. That's my only point.
I understand.
But the other, you're right. We should discuss that critically. You're right. But this is my main point here in showing these surveys. You see more detailed surveys here now with different backgrounds. This is one in Germany. They had 12 or 13 questions or so. And that might be one reason why there's a difference. So there was a question, in my religion, they warn us against trusting Jews. And they had a survey of different, that was high school students. They surveyed 2,500 high school students. And those with Turkish backgrounds, and they all identified themselves as Muslim. And I said 15% of them said, completely agreed, that in their religion they warn us against trusting Jews. Right. 20% with Kurdish background, 18% with Arab background, 7% with Polish background. So there you have a comparison to other background with Christian background, and 28% without any migrant background. So also there you see difference between Muslims and non-Muslims. And also, if you distinguish between people with migrant background and non-migrant background, right? The people from Polish background in Germany have also migrant background. And this is the other question there. In my religion, it is the Jews who drive the world to disaster. You see similar responses, that more people with Muslim background, with different ethnic backgrounds, so Turkish, Kurdish, or Arab background, And there you also see these differences. They agree more to these attitudes than people without Muslim background. Yeah? Okay. And, well, there is also these classical Jews have too much influence in the world. We can also distinguish between these backgrounds. It shows similar results, but maybe surprising here is that 40% with Arab background do think so. So there's a difference. They all, the first three, Turkish, Kurdish, and Arab, people with Arab background, they all identify as Muslim, but there are differences, right? With their ethnic background. Okay. I don't want to bore you too much with these surveys. I want to go to the statistics about incidents, anti-Semitic incidents, and here we have violent anti-Semitic incidents in France. In France, there is the police and also a Jewish organization that collects data, and the CNCDH, this is a governmental organization. They collect these data on violent incidents per year. They do their annual reports, and this is where I got these numbers from. First of all, we see that from the 1990s, there's a sharp rise in anti-Semitic incidents in France, in violent anti-Semitic incidents, sharp rise. And then what you see green is those who were identified as Muslim or Arab, and that varies per year, and it goes from well, in the year 2000, from 109 out of was 125 or so incidents to 19 out of 130 something in 2011. So it varies. And what you see as yellow here is those who are not identified. Because often, of course, if there's a violent incident, we don't know what the background is, in many cases. Unfortunately, the CNCDH for the year 2012, they did not collect data or didn't publish data on the ethnic or religious background.
Why?
That is a good question I asked them. They didn't reply to me. It's a very good question. I had the same, so yeah, didn't reply to me yet, and I have to ask them again probably. Yeah. But there were, we know, in 2012 there was a very violent incident, the most violent incidents for decades, probably the most violent incidents in post-war Europe. That was in Toulouse. You are familiar with that, where a jihadist shot 3 children and 1 teacher and father. And that, of course, had a huge impact on the Jewish community, not only in Toulouse, not only in France, but all over Europe. If you don't think that your children are safe in school, for some years, there were reports of violent incidents in public schools in France, and Jewish parents then said, well, if it gets worse, we send our children to Jewish schools. But with this incident, this is not, they cannot be, the Jewish children cannot be safe. And so it has a huge impact on the Jewish communities all over Europe. Yeah.
What does that CNCDH stand for? Is that, what organization is that?
It is a governmental organization. Commission, the French, sorry, it's from France. Yeah. Commission Nationale.
But it's French government. This is government sponsored.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I forgot the...
Are they intimidated about reporting Muslim incidents provoked by Muslims, or do you think that may be why they don't report them, why they did it in 2012?
Yeah, but it's strange that they did it all these years and then not in 2012. But I think it might be a new government policy, but the French government today is outspoken against anti-Semitism, and they do take action, but they are reluctant to talk about Islamists. So that might be a reason, yes, but I don't know. That was my, well, that's still my question, yeah. Well, the statistics in the UK are a bit more difficult because we don't have statistics about the religious background. We have statistics about the appearance of ethnicity, and we can only refer from that indirectly. So it's more difficult. And my estimation is that about 30% of the perpetrators in the UK of anti-Semitic incidents are Muslims. But this is the estimation I make from these figures, like those with Asian background, those with Arab or North African background, those with black and white. And I assume that about half of those with Asian background, Asian in this case, in the British context, is Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, right? And so if you look on the statistics, about half of this group that is described as Asian is Muslim. So this is just an estimation. But you can contest that, and we don't really know. And the Muslim population in the UK is about 5%.
Total in the country?
Yes, in the country.
That's mostly urban.
Sorry?
That's mostly urban, right?
Yes. So it
So we're
differs.
going to come in contact with Pakistanis. It's not like the overall population. You're not going to find a lot of Pakistanis in Yorkshire.
Yeah.
You're going to find them in urban places. So
Yeah.
that's all.
But this is also nationwide. The statistics on anti-Semitic incidents is nationwide.
It doesn't matter if it's nationwide, if it's in the city, what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't count the whole population of Britain.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that Muslims are a larger percentage of the population that are in contact, which is the general English population, because they're in the cities.
Right, but not 30%. In London, for example, if you talk about London or Manchester, where the majority of Jews also live, yeah, then in these cities, the percentage of Muslims is not 30%, it's about 10%.
Oh, okay.
What percentage of the UK is Jewish?
Oh, there are about 300,000 Jews in the UK.
So less than half a percent.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And then there was a recent survey, an interesting one. Jews were asked what they think what the background of the perpetrators are. And this was distinguished between serious anti-Semitic violence and threats and harassment. So these are the statistics about serious anti-Semitic violence and threats. And there, 40% of the Jews who took part in this survey, and it was in these 8 different countries, yeah, Belgium, France, Germany, Hungary, Italy, Latvia, Sweden, and the UK, 40% said they were Muslim.
These were Jewish victims.
Jewish victims,
Okay.
Jewish victims,
They're not just Jewish,
Yeah.
they're actual
In
victims.
what way were they victims?
they were victims of anti-Semitic violence and
They were
threats.
attacked, they were personally attacked?
Yes,
Or threatened.
insulted, threatened, attacked. And they were asked, took part in the survey, and that was their response. And this, as you can see, includes countries like Hungary, Latvia, and Sweden, where not many Muslims live. So we can assume that it's in France, this percentage is higher. Right.
So what's FRA? That's doing the survey?
Oh yeah, this is the survey was done by the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. And this is sponsored by the European Union. So it's not a private organization or institute. And they did it in cooperation with some universities, but they, well, were sponsored by the European Union. And if you look on harassment, the percentage of people with Muslim backgrounds or Muslims were 27%. And interestingly here we can see, oh sorry, those with, I don't know if you know that the second largest is people with left wing, or from the left. So more than 20% from the left, more than from the right. And also, this is also true for the anti-Semitic violence and threats. I found that really interesting, that those with left wing, that were affiliated with the left, were more than affiliated with the right. Okay. But my question is, why is that so? Why do we have a difference here? I mean, we can observe that in these different surveys that there is a difference between Muslims and non-Muslims. But why is that so? So there are different theories about that. Some said, well, this is because they are discriminated, and so they take it out on Jews. Some said it's because of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and they identify Jews with the Israelis, and then they take it out on Jews. I didn't find all these arguments convincing, so I thought the best way to find out is to ask Muslims themselves, if they don't like Jews, why is it so? And I did interviews in Berlin, and Paris, and London, and I asked more than 100 young people, why is it that they, or what are their views of Jews? I can tell you more about the methods, and but what I found out is that there are 4 different answers, 4 different categories why they say they don't like Jews. So there's classic anti-Semitism, conspiracy theories and stereotypes like Jews are rich. Then there are negative views of Jews with references to Israel, like Jews or Israelis kill children. And often there is no distinction between Jews and Israelis. And then we have also a third category of arguments. Yeah?
You say there's no distinction between Israelis and Jews?
Yeah. By the Muslims, really, yes. Often they say, well, the Jews kill children, and then ask, well, do the Jews kill children? And they ask, yes, in Palestine, they kill children. And I ask, well, I say, are these the Jews in general, and are these Israelis? And for them, often they say explicitly, no, it's all the same. And some just, if they're more educated, they make a distinction. But then during the conversation, it gets conflated again. Very few people who have negative views of Israel make the distinction. That was my observation. So, yeah. So that's then the image of the Jews, right? And it's rather the idea, or if there is something to have a negative views about Israel, it is for them a sign how bad the Jews are. So it's the idea of the Jews. And then there's a third category where direct references to the Muslim identity, or the ethnic identity, or Islam. And that comes across as if there's a widespread assumption that Muslims and Jews are enemies in general. among Muslims. And if you think about that, if you truly believe that, and you identify as a Muslim, then how can you distinguish yourself from that? That would mean then to say, well, the Muslims don't like the Jews, but they are all wrong, the Muslims, and I don't have a problem with that. So if, and about a third of those I interviewed believe that Muslims and Jews are enemies, it is very difficult for them then to say, well, but the Jews are not my enemies. So this is an argument with the Muslim identity. And then there are also other arguments with direct reference to the Quran or to stories about Muhammad, hadith they might have heard in mosques or friends or family members. And then I think most frighteningly is if somebody is asked, why do you, or says, somebody else says he doesn't like Jews, and then is asked why, and doesn't feel the need to rationalize it. Or says, I hate Jews and this is just like it is, so what? So that shows that is the highly irrational aspect of anti-Semitism, which is its core. I mean, the other arguments, so-called arguments, are not really arguments. It's not a to hate Jews in general. There is no argument for it, so it's irrational anyway. But some do not even feel the need to try to rationalize it. I would like to give you some examples. This for the classical anti-Semitism, you're all familiar with that, like the control of everything, and Jews are rich. Don't want to go into that, but maybe the well, this one, because I think that is goes far beyond Muslims. These negative views of Jews with reference to Israel, and that has well, two things come up, and they come up very often also in Western newspapers, even New York Times and other newspapers. The idea that Jews kill children, or Israelis kill children, is a very common topic. And it's emotionalizing. I think that's a very important aspect, emotionalizing, and then stirring up, can stir up hatred that is already there. If you have this kind of view, and if you can interpret images, you're probably all familiar with the Al-Dura case 14 years ago, where this young boy was hiding behind a concrete block with his father and allegedly shot by Israelis, but he was actually not shot by Israeli soldiers, but it was this image, Jews kill children, or Israelis kill children on purpose. Sorry? Al-Dura, yes, Mohammed Al-Dura. Yeah. So this is very emotionalizing. And another aspect is that with regard to Israel, many have the view that they think Jews have taken Muslim or Palestinian or Arab land, and it was not right. It's and that it has a legitimization as an effect, not only for some border issues. Nobody's concerned with some borders or with some settlements. This is not the issue. It's the general question of existence of Israel there. So these two aspects are popular with these references to Israel, and it's not nothing that there might be additional tropes of Jews poison water or steal water from Palestinians, but these are not the most important tropes here. The most important are the Jews kill children, and it is the entire Israel is a project that is not legitimate because this land was taken allegedly and belonged allegedly to Arabs and Muslims or Palestinians. Yes, with the Muslim identity, well, I talked about that I want to, we can go into that a little bit later, but I just want to point out these negative views of Jews without rationalization. That comes up in language also, that in German and in French, the term for Jew, Jude or Juif, has become, among many young people, an insult. Even if there's no Jew present, it is in the everyday language, it's become an insult. So what does this make of it? It just, first of all, it only works if everybody agrees that this is something negative. Otherwise, this wouldn't work as an insult. And then it is very difficult to stand up against this. Anybody to speak out against the usage of this term in a negative way is immediately insulted as a Jew. So it is something which is very difficult to fight and which spreads then in youth culture very easily. And most in most schools in Germany and France, there are reports, or in many schools at least, there are reports that this is a common usage of the term for Jew. So it has become a certain norm, kind of common sense, that Jewish is something negative. And if you, I mean, one of the extreme examples of this kind of argument, which is they didn't bother to argue, was done by somebody in Berlin, Bashir. He said, when asked why he has so much hatred against Jews, he said, the damn Jews should be burned because they are Jews nevertheless. Jews are, a Jew is a Jew anyway. So there's no reason for it. It's only Jews are Jews, and this is why we hate Jews. So what are factors of influence? They often refer themselves that they have these ideas from family members or friends. And not all accept that, by the way. So I had some interesting examples where they, even against their own parents, I know from somebody with a Lebanese Palestinian background, he said his father at one point wanted him to become a martyr, to kill Jews in Israel. That's what he said. And he stand up against his father and said, this is completely ridiculous. I don't want to kill anybody, and I don't want to kill myself. So there are a few examples who then speak out and even go against their parents, but it's, to imagine, very difficult to do that. So family and friends do have a very important influence, and when we look into this structure about language, where Jew has become a common insult, we can maybe understand how difficult it is then to step back from this influence from friends. Yes?
I would think that using the term Jew would have been an insult 40, 50, 60 years ago,
yeah.
Right? And so, is this something that's developing now? Or have you compared it to 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
Sorry, is it? Yeah, I mean, it was even, it was common, and it has come back, I think, in the last 10 years or so, yeah. Yeah, it's difficult to see, I mean, we don't have enough, I mean, we have some anecdotes about this. Some people remember, yes, in their school, it was also an insult, used as an insult, but we don't have it. Yeah, from these anecdotes I can, that I know of, there is a new wave of using that language, yes. In Germany and France, in the UK it's a bit different. And it was more common in the 1990s than today. I don't know why. Yes?
You mentioned earlier that there's poverty and unemployment. amongst the Muslim population.
Yes.
Do you have any data that correlates unemployment to these events?
Yes.
In various cities
Yes.
of each of these kind of 4 countries?
Yes. There is this first one of the surveys here. This one. Jews cannot be trusted, right? That was made in different countries, and we have the results for 3 countries. So it was a survey on how people think the Jews can be trusted or not, as an anti-Semitic statement, if you say Jews can be trusted. And they asked also about the educational background and also about the income. And they did not find any correlation. And also another survey from Belgium was the same. Well, they had more questions of anti-Semitic items, and they also did not find a correlation. Yeah.
What's the difference between 7% and 56.7% in Belgium?
One's Christians, one's
Oh,
Muslims.
one's Muslim, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we go to the media. Yes, the media. Often it has been said that it's the Arab news channels like Al Jazeera that, of course, you get in Germany and France, the UK and everywhere, and that has some influence. But most Muslims, and particularly young Muslims, do not speak Arabic in a way that they can understand the news. So sometimes they're influenced then by parents watching these channels and by the pictures, but as far as other surveys also tell about the media consumption, these channels are not the main source of information.
But they're loaded to hear bad things about Israel. I said, if Arabic youth listen to the vernacular news,
Yes.
they hear bad things about Israel, because Israel does lots of bad things.
Absolutely.
End up in the unbiased news.
Absolutely.
And they're ready to hear bad things.
Right.
And so they're further radicalized because they hear what they want to hear.
Absolutely. This is a very good point, because often then it matters how certain images are interpreted. If you have an anti-Semitic view already, then you get a confirmation. If you want to see that Jews killed children, you can see that in some images. And also in mainstream media, they are not too careful in making distinctions.
And there's an interaction between this and what you said earlier about the second reason.
Yes?
Anti-Semitism. That's all.
Yeah, right. And school, unfortunately, we think of school, yes?
Well, I I was at Boston College last week where the Students for Justice in Palestine invited one of the Israeli soldiers from Breaking the Silence. And these people don't know that, these college students don't know the history of the land of Israel. And, these are kids receiving a college education who don't have, I think a lot of this points to lack of education or consistency of what we're teaching in education worldwide. It's not just at Boston College, it's at all universities, and that, the British mandate was all part of this huge piece of land that eventually became Palestinian Judea and Transjordan. But they don't realize this. They don't know. They don't realize it. They don't know it. So even Israeli soldiers don't know the history. Because this guy, and if he knew it, he wasn't intelligent.
Yeah, and this is the next one, the school. The school is still a very important source of information, of course, for young people. But we see that sometimes stereotypes are reproduced in school, and sometimes some refer to anti-Semitic thinking of what they have learned in school, particularly about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but on other issues about the Jewish control before the Second World War for the Holocaust. So it's not all good in school, and it should also be watched what teachers are teaching, absolutely. And there's a room for improvement, as diplomats would say. Yes. Yes. And of course, I mean, we have mosques, and there is an increase in religion among Muslims in not only Europe, but worldwide. And so mosques gain more and more influence. But that doesn't mean that everybody who's identifying as Muslim regularly goes to mosques. Some only go once a year, and not even that. But those who identify as Muslim, usually the Imam is a very respected person. So whatever he says has an important impact, usually, and it's rarely questioned. We see if we distinguish in surveys between people who are more religious than others, that this also has an effect. Those who are more religious tend to have more anti-Semitic attitudes.
I don't know if I should ask you this. I'm wondering what drew you to this topic.
Sorry?
I was wondering what drew you to be specialized in this topic.
Yeah, that was the lack of research on that and denial that it has an effect. I was in 2002, 2003, 2004 in Berlin, and there was a rise of anti-Semitism after 9/11. That means that in the streets there were attacks on Jews. That means there were anti-Semitic graffiti. That means that some of my friends who were not Jewish were accused of being Jews and then attacked because they had they spoke out against anti-Semitic views. So there was a time when I thought, well, where does it come from? And then there was a survey which showed that in different European countries there are many of the attacks against Jews come from people with Muslim Arab backgrounds, and this survey, also by the predecessor of this organization, FRA, they dismissed, they gave this study, they commissioned this study, but they were not happy with the results, and they withdrew the study. I said, what is wrong there? And I said, it's important to look at that in more detail. And also I was then working in 2003 in an educational project, and we wanted to reach young people with different backgrounds. And so for us it was important to know what they think and why specifically they don't like Jews, if you want to work on that. So that was my personal story why I came to that. Yeah, so maybe just coming to the conclusions, we see that different sources. I mean, this is not, we cannot generalize saying, well, it's all because of the Islam, whatever then the Islam is. It has different factors. We cannot say it's because of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In my view, this is often an excuse to justify anti-Semitic feelings. So, and it's also, if we look into correlations between discrimination and developing anti-Semitic ideas, even in theory, for me it doesn't make any sense. Nobody so far has explained to me why there should be a correlation. That if somebody is discriminated, why this person then should hate Jews. I don't understand it, and I don't find it if I look into the data. But what there is, I think one strong factor is what people think of Islam. If they have a certain way of interpreting Islam in opposition to Judaism, for example, or in seeing Islam at war globally with Christianity and Judaism. Some people have these ideas. Then, of course, it's a source for anti-Semitic attitudes. All right. So I think I want to conclude here, and we should discuss it a bit more. I can go into some details if you want. Yeah. Thank you.
I assume that you gathered some of this information yourself.
Yes.
Is that correct? When you were asking these questions, did your subject ask you why you're asking the questions, who you are, and how the information will be used?
Yes. First of all, we did it with different. There were different interviewers. We had 2 women, 2 men, and 2 with Muslim background and 2 with non-Muslim background. And we tried it out a bit, and we didn't see much difference between the answers to the different interviews. And what we said, it is used for university. It's a research project. All the names, I put out some names, but they are not their real names, and we told them that. And there was not very much hesitation to tell us what they believe or what they think. Yeah. So that was not an issue. I mean, it's rather a time issue, but if you think about it, I used, and also the other interviews used, that very few people get often the occasion to talk about whatever they want for, I don't know, half an hour, and somebody's listening. So that's rare. Yeah.
It sounds like mission impossible, but what can be done to influence the views of Muslims?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think if we look into that, first of all, we have to acknowledge, well, one thing, it cannot be tolerated, right? So it cannot be excused. There's no excuse for hating Jews. So if politicians say this is because of discrimination, then this is an excuse for anti-Semitism. So this should not be done. So there should be clear condemnation of anti-Semitic action and attitudes. That's the first thing, in school and from politicians and so on. The second thing is these ideas, if you look at these ideas of, if somebody has this idea, Muslims and Jews are enemies, there must be a reform within Islam and Muslim organizations. They have to speak out against this, against these ideas of enmity between Jews and Muslims. These are some things. Then in schools, I think, they need more education. But I think the most important thing is that people speak out. Often the rise of anti-Semitism depends less on the people who are anti-Semites, but more on those who speak out or do not speak out. So it's very important that from all members of society, Muslims and non-Muslims, people speak out and do not accept this and do not excuse it, as is often the case. Now, excuse it as either it's a result of discrimination or either it's a result of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And both is wrong and dangerous. Yes?
To what extent are the Muslims in these various countries living in cloistered communities versus interacting with the general culture? And I guess the corollary to that is you haven't really talked yet about the influence of these Muslim populations on the national governments that they're in.
Sorry, say it again.
Two-part question.
Yes.
First is, I'm familiar with Muslims in Paris, but I'm not familiar with Muslims in other areas.
Yes.
Are they living in cloistered communities, or are they living in communities where they interact with the general population?
Right.
And the second part of the question is, to what extent are Muslim views influencing national policy by country?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a very important question, I think.
Two questions, sorry.
Yeah. Two important questions.
No, I meant two questions. You can tell me if you want to know.
He's got two more after that.
I think
I've been quiet the whole time, guys. That looked my mouth.
I think it's it's sometimes it's exaggerated how parallel the societies are. There's more interrelation, but it depends on the area. In some areas, we have some schools where there are 99% Muslims, and there's not much, but these are rather exceptions still. So, but there's a tendency for more separation, and it's. I think the governments are aware of the dangerous developments in that, because if society gets too much split in this way, it's difficult to hold it together. And this is in France. It's also in Britain. It's a pressing issue.
It's in Germany too, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's less so because the people with Turkish background, they have Turkey has a strong tradition of secularism, and many of about 25% of the Muslims or Muslim Turks in Germany, they are Alevis, and Alevism, these are not the same Alevis as in Syria. Otherwise would be them in Syria. But Alevis, there's in Turkey, and they are have a very liberal interpretation of Islam. And so that is a little bit less, I think, of a problem. You have less Islamist organizations. I mean, the Islamist organizations in Germany are militarish. So this is, they're still Islamists, but they are not as radical as some others in the UK or in France. So the influence from Muslim organization on the government policies, yeah, there has been some attempts even to accept Sharia law in the UK in some instances in family conflict. I mean, in conflicts within families or different issues have been accepted as a kind of agreement that can substitute court decisions in a way. And there's an ongoing debate on that in the UK. In France, that would be impossible to think of that, because they have this very secular approach. Often it's the question, if there's in the constituency, if the vote is that if politicians try to make their politics in a way that Muslims would vote them, Islamists maybe vote for them. This is the case in few areas. Yeah, in Tower Hamlets in London, for example, it is the case. But in most places, Muslims are not in the majority, or I mean, they have like 5, 6, 7% of the vote at the most, because often they do not have the right to vote. So they have
because of citizenship.
Citizenship, yes. In Germany, only half the Muslims are Germans. In France, there's more, but still.
In the UK as well.
Yeah, in the UK, I have the statistics, but it's a bit more than majority.
So you would conclude that many of the anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian movements in European governments are not due to the Muslim influence in those countries? Okay.
They are. If you look on surveys, the anti-Israeli attitudes are very high in the general population in all European countries. They don't need the Muslims for that, if you want.
What do you credit that? What do you credit that to? I mean, why is it that that's greater now than 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
The anti-Israel.
Israel and anti-Semitism.
It's never. I mean, it was never dead. Anti-Semitism in Europe, right?
The rise in incidences as
Yeah.
violent incidences. Where?
Yes, that's right. I think there's less. It's more outspoken now than 15, 20 years ago. People do not hesitate as much as they did 20 years ago. One of the, I think it is since the end of the 1990s, and particularly since 9/11, that there's a rise of anti-Semitism. The excuse of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one thing, but that was true also in the 1960s. And 67 was that was maybe marginal in what your population that they, I'm not sure. I don't really know why there is this rise, but it has something to do with the global development, with the global phenomenon. The rise of anti-Semitism is a global rise. Islam is one factor, but it's only one factor. Yeah.
Do you think a focused program, say at high school level, gymnasium level, young ones, aimed at debunking this and dealing with it, whether it be lectures in their schools, movies, Facebook programs, comic strips, the way these young people communicate with each other, clarifying this issue, applying, if possible, corrective to this form of thinking, would influence in an effective way the coming generation?
Well, these are, what tools do we have? We have education and condemnation, that's the tools we have.
Well, and communication.
Yeah.
At their level.
And there are attempts in Germany to do that. There is a wonderful project by the American Jewish Committee. They have an office in Berlin, and they gather educators and they develop programs. But these are programs, in one school year they do this, and they have funding for 2 years maybe if they're lucky. So it's not widespread, but there are some of these programs in place, and I think it should be, but it's not in the general education of teachers, so that's where it should go into. So in the teachers' education. And that should go with governmental programs, and there should be maybe more push towards that, and that I think would be more successful. But I mean, all the other programs they have good programs, but they are only very small programs. I don't know who was first here. Yeah.
During the Depression, Father Coughlin and a newspaper sponsored by a Ford Motor Company, and in New Jersey and in Michigan, there are people who marched around in uniform with the swastika on their uniform. And in Morristown, New Jersey, they had to pass a law specifically saying you weren't allowed to march in the uniform of a foreign country, and it was the only way you could stop it. And that was the symptom of the Depression. And the consequences and the logical consequences are painfully obvious.
Yeah. People try to get around. We have laws in European countries, in many European countries, in Germany and France, that, for example, do ban some symbols or Holocaust denial and so on. But we have also comedians. You might have heard of Dieudonné Balabala, French comedian. He invented a kind of Nazi salute, which resembles a Nazi salute, but is not quite a Nazi salute. And that is widely used by people who want to show their enmity against Jews, maybe, or other things. But so it's difficult to deal with that in a in a way banning, but it's also necessary, yes.
So,
Sorry, you go first, I think.
Is there any Muslim group anywhere that advocates a less bigoted approach
Yes.
to white Muslims?
Yes.
So we don't hear much about them. I mean, occasionally I read about them in memory, but I don't hear much about it. Do they have any impact? Are they attacked? Are they supported? Are they funding?
Yeah.
Who are they?
Yeah. There are some, most of them are individuals, like politicians. In Germany, we have some politicians, they say they're Muslim and they condemn anti-Semitism. Whenever there's an incident, they condemn it. So these are individuals, like some of them, Öschlü, he's from the Green Party, and, well, they're different from different parties. Then we have other individuals, very good one, good organization. It's called the Heroes Project. It is founded by a young Palestinian Israeli, speaking out against anti-Semitism, but also against the idea of honor and how to treat women, women's rights, and this is ideas of questioning some of the assumptions that are widespread in Muslim communities. So we have some of these organizations, yes, but there are exceptions.
Individual people, are there organizations that are gaining or are working to gain support in common? They being funded by someone? Is there something like, is there the beginnings of something like the ADL? Is there any hint of that anywhere? I'm going to say the ADL does, but at least they make a lot of noise. Right.
There's an equivalent, you may know the equivalent of the European APAC that started, I forgot.
Berlin.
Yeah.
And see, that's for any organized Jewish approach to try to educate befriend the Muslims.
Yes, yes, there are. I mean, the outreach programs, Jewish Muslim friendship.
There is.
There are.
I don't know if it is.
Like Jewish Muslim friendship. There are. Yes, there are some.
Here or in Israel or
No, in Europe, in UK, in France. But the problem is that the Muslim organization, most of the Muslim organization, they consider themselves a Muslim organization because they, or those who go to a Muslim organization, for them religion is very important. And for those who have a more secular approach, they would organize themselves maybe in a football club or in a club in another way, but not necessarily as Muslims. And the support often comes from foreign countries. So in Germany, the Turkish Muslim organizations are often closely related with Turkey, with the Turkish government. In France, closely related with Algeria and Morocco, from Tunisia. And it's a bit different in UK, but in UK you have, it has been a center for Islamist organizations that were banned in Egypt and in other Arab countries, and they could set up their center, Hizb ut-Tahrir, for example, in London.
I have two quick questions. You said with with simplicity, but it was profound. You said there's no distinction in your survey between those who don't like Jews and don't like Israel. That the anti-Semitism is interconnected. In the United States, in the American Jewish community, and among scholars, there's this great debate that criticism, even unfair criticism of Israel, is political, and that anti-Semitism is something completely separate. Based on your findings in Europe, can you just comment on how your findings fit into this sort of discourse or discussion that's taking place in the community and among scholars? What is your view?
Yeah, I mean, those who are more educated, they learn what is acceptable in the discourse. And they want to be part of the discourse. So if I want to be educated, if I want to get a job as a, I don't know, a teacher or somebody, I cannot say openly I hate Jews, right? Yeah?
Can I have a question in a moment?
Sorry?
No, go on.
I just started. So this is one general assumption. I have to fit in. If I want to be part of the intellectual society, I have to fit in a way. Right? Otherwise, it will be difficult for me to fit. So this is one motivation to watch my language. In general, maybe we can agree on that.
No, that's hypocritical.
So this is one thing. And the next thing is, if we accept that there are anti-Semites out there, some people are anti-Semites. And what can they do if they're anti-Semites and if they want to express themselves? So either they shut their mouths, or they do not act upon their beliefs, or they try to find ways to do it and to get away with it. So some anti-Semites are educated anti-Semites. And some educated anti-Semites look for ways to express their anti-Semitism. And one way to express your anti-Semitism today is saying, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm an anti-Zionist.
Yes.
I need a number.
Sorry?
I need a number to call that argument valid.
Yeah. And I don't need a number, because I need to distinguish then what would be anti-Zionism, or to think of what is anti-Zionism. If somebody says, I'm anti-Zionist, yeah?
So my question is more, how does the reality that you study in your Muslim community, how does that reality fit into the sort of the discourse taking place in the American Jewish community and among scholars? Some scholars and some members of the community are saying these are separate issues, and there's some that are saying, like me, that they're interconnected and we can't really separate. How does your study fit into the discourse in the community, and in the academic community and the Jewish community, if it does?
Yeah, there are, I mean, I'm not sure about what exactly you're talking. Are you talking about people like Brian Druck, he's a professor in London, I think? He says, those who attack, in an article in 2004, those who attack with Muslim or Arab background, who attack Jews, they don't do it because they want to attack Jews, they do it because they are against the Israeli government and their anger is just expressed in another way. And even if they say they hate Jews, they don't really mean it. That's what he said. And I mean, you can turn and interpret any incident in another way, but this is, for me, that does not make any sense. It's just based in his fantasy. If you don't take, I mean, not the action and not what people say as what it is. But I mean, you can, of course, you can make of reality, if you want to interpret it away, yeah, it's just ridiculous, I think. This argument. But also in general, like are we talking about this case interpreted in Muslim or Arab people's actions, or is it in general when people say we criticize Israel and this is, we can distinguish this between?
So maybe just to clarify where I'm coming from. So in the work that I do, I go to philanthropists and members of the community and scholars, and many of the scholars who work with ISGAP claim, in varying ways and different degrees and from different approaches, that there's a very powerful correlation between contemporary anti-Semitism in Europe and North America and the world and the demonization of Israel. There's a link, they're interconnected. There are people who say no.
Yeah.
That if it's the Israeli government, it's settlements, it's occupation, if Netanyahu would change and there'd be peace, that's a separate issue than anti-Semitism, let's say in Kansas or in New York.
Yeah, so more general. Yes, I mean, we can, how can we answer this question? We can look into surveys, right? And you did one survey, and you did an examination, and you found correlation. I know from another survey in Germany, they asked questions about people that had, I don't know, 20 questions or so. And some were related to anti-Semitism, and some were related to criticism of Israel. And they found that only 10% of those who criticized who had critical opinions of Israel, only 10% of those did not have anti-Semitic views.
Who did that?
That was the center in Bielefeld, and that was in 2004, I think. I can send it to you. So that is one way of looking at it. I did another way. I talked to people, to many people. I did interviews, and I found out those who had a very critical view of Israel, if I talked to them long enough, they mix it up, and then Semitic stereotypes pop up. So from that experience, I can also say there is a strong relation between it. And then I think the real questions here are just, I mean, what do people consider as critical of Israel? Yeah? If you have some criticism, of course there can be criticism of some policies and some, but if you have it in a way, Bernard Harrison, I recently read what he said. He said, if you accuse Israel of an utterly exceptional crime, well, he's British, so he has this mentality, utterly exceptional crime. I mean, to make the point that there's no, Israel shouldn't exist, you have to make the accusation of an utterly exceptional crime. And this is, what can that be?
Dropping an atom bomb.
Sorry?
Dropping an atomic bomb.
If they do it, or what?
Well, no, we did it, right? Well, why should we be subjected to it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And this utterly exceptional crime, the accusation of it, if there is such an accusation, and it is not, any I know of, is not based on reality, so that would be a clear sign for me that this is an anti-Semitic accusation, and not a criticism of some sort.
You know this is not your data, and it's probably was not intended in your presentation. Should we be more concerned with Muslim anti-Semitism in Europe or Christian anti-Semitism in Europe?
It's not Christian anti-Semitism in Europe.
I don't mean Christian theology. I mean Jabok's, the Greek party.
In Europe or in the United States?
Europe. I'm talking Europe.
Yeah.
We're going to address that same slide.
I see correlation in this sort, that it's often many of the anti-Semitic attacks are done by Muslims. In France, the statistics say about 30 to 50%, but it's when you talk to those in Jewish community who collect the incidents, they say more than 50%, and because there's a huge gap where we don't know the background of the perpetrators, right? So we don't know exactly. But many of the anti-Semitic attacks, and surely the most violent ones, are done by Muslims or Arabs in France and in the UK and in Germany. There also is a strong far right, radical far right, neo-Nazis who are very violent as well. So I think it is often because it's tolerated, the anti-Semitism by Muslims is tolerated in the population and among politicians, saying, well, they have their reasons because they affiliate themselves with the Palestinians, even if in the Turkish case it's not true. I mean, most Turks, they surely do not want to be identified with Palestinians or Arabs in general. Right? So this is not, but this is often excused then, and it legitimizes anti-Semitic violence in a way. So it becomes more widespread. But of course, I mean, under 10% of the population in any of these countries is Muslim. So if the majority, if the 90% is strongly against anti-Semitism, this wouldn't be a problem, or at least not this big of a problem. So of course we should be concerned with the majority. But we shouldn't accept violence and anti-Semitic incidents from the minority.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, take the first, yeah.
In any population, when a group is marginalized and don't have any clout, they're going to act out. That's what a minority of people do anyway. I mean, we've certainly experienced that in this country. if the Muslims could be brought into the community in a way that they have more equality, wouldn't that change things? Wouldn't it be less apt to be looking down on Jews or anybody else as far as that goes? Does anybody consider finding a way to make their lives, I'm generalizing because I'm sure that's not true of everybody, but I've seen the Algerians in France, for example, and they attack people on the street, you know, whether they're Jewish or not, because they're angry. So I'm not really offering any new information, I don't think, but
No, but it's an interesting
to help them in some way?
It's a very interesting point because in Europe we have different minorities and only some are Muslim. We have also, I mean, most discrimination is against Roma and Sinti. Roma and Sinti, we don't know of any particular hatred of Jews among Roma and Sinti. Gypsies.
Of gypsies.
So, and also like Black Africans from Africa, they are in many countries, in Germany and France, they are more discriminated against Muslims. And also among them, it's not necessarily they have more anti-Semitic attitudes developed. So the correlation there is not, but if they are part of the mainstream, they would, I mean, in many ways also in attitudes, they would be well, hopefully it's faster.
What is so fascinating is the level of Hungarian attitudes and views. During the Second World War, we remember very clearly that more Jews were killed by Magyars on the road out than they were by the Gestapo. So those same latent anti-Semitic feelings are there, probably generated now by additional hatred of Muslims, but they're latently there.
Yeah, I mean the Hungarians. I just want to put it in because now it's an issue today. I mean the last years in Hungary, the rise of anti-Semitism, also the rise of the radical right in Hungary. But there are almost no Muslims in Hungary, so it's not really powerful.
So we should wrap it up quickly. So one last
Well,
question.
you mentioned 9/11 at least twice in your talk.
Yes.
And as a kind of a catalyst to anti-Semitism, is that because they believe in a conspiracy theory that the Jews were responsible for 9/11?
Sure.
In other words, they still believe that.
Yes. Many believe that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, but many believe that, yes.
And just to wrap it up, Gunther, one last question. On, I think it was January the 27th and 28th, there was this massive rally in Paris.
Yeah.
So people estimated there were 17,000 people. There were West African men, the extreme right, kind of marching together. And they were, I don't know if people were aware, they were yelling anti-Semitic slogans and Jews and Israel
Jews
and
out.
France.
That was the first time publicly, at least what is known, that on the streets of Paris there was the call to throw Jews out of France, yes.
So given your research and you lived in France, were you shocked?
Oh yeah.
What's your thoughts on what happened?
Yeah. I mean, this is it is such a fast development in France of anti-Semitic, of the rise of anti-Semitism. I mean, there was this wave of anti-Semitic incidents after 2000, in 2000 and afterwards on the streets, and Jews were not feeling safe in some areas and so on. And then there was this, in 2012, in the school, Jewish school, Torah, that was so violent, and there was not only this individual doing the violence, but there was support for this guy then afterwards.
These were West Africans?
No, he was from a North African background.
Who was this?
North African. North African, that makes more sense. You said the guy in North African.
Yes.
Or Algerian? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you said sort of West African.
I said West African, yes, I did.
Was it them? Or was
The
it
Jomney is from Cameroon.
Oh, Dudon is something different, so somebody else. So that was in 2012. 2012 there was this violent attack with some support. I mean, but there was still strong condemnation by the government. Then there was Dieudonné going on, and then there was, I mean, Dieudonné was this Nazi salute, and he made a film, The Antisemite, right? He wanted to show in Cannes, but that didn't happen. But The Antisemite with Iranian money, and if you have seen that film, it's a dream of an anti-Semite. And then there was this on the streets on the, I think it was 26th, 25th of January. It was a Sunday, I think. So it was shortly before in France you have the Holocaust Memorial Day is 27th of January, like the liberation of Auschwitz. And that was, I mean, that was a truly shock for me. It didn't find enough condemnation, I think, among intellectuals. There are only very few who spoke out against that, and that was even more of a shock for me in France. Yeah.
You still have faith in scholars. So anyway, Gunther, thank you very much. Thank you for coming. On behalf of ISGAP, I'll give you the books that we've published. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Your important presentation, a good presentation, but especially for the important work you're doing and continued important work that you will do. Thank you. Okay, and thank you for coming. So this is the end of our events for the seminars of this year. We plan.
Germany, most of the Muslims have Turkish origin. What we can see also from it's mostly a result from the immigration background, that is most Muslims came in the 70s and 80s to work in Europe and came from rather poor backgrounds, and today we can see that Muslims are disproportionately disadvantaged when it comes to housing, education, and also employment. But I think it's important to see that when we talk about Muslims in Europe, they have very different backgrounds ethnically, and also from the interpretation of Islam. So we have Shiites, we have Sunnis, we have Alevis, and it is, if we speak of the Muslims in Europe, we should think about the diversity of it. We have Islamist organizations in Europe, a number of them, many of them are influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood. That is due to the history of the last decades, well, in fact, since the 1960s and even in some respects earlier. Often Islamist organizations present themselves as representative, but they are not. If you ask in surveys Muslims if they feel represented by Islamist organizations, they are not representative. But they are the most vocal and have influences in mosques and Muslim community centers and so on. So if we have a look on anti-Semitism, how do we establish the fact it's since about 15 years there's a rise of anti-Semitism in Europe, I would say, in all countries.
Günther Jikeli is here, and he's going to speak on anti-Semitism among Muslims in Europe. And I'm just going to speak for a brief moment. I had sort of an intense 10 days or so I just want to touch on it. Some of you know that I was there. I went to Rwanda. It was the 20th anniversary of the genocide in Rwanda. And there was an international conference for memory in Kigali, in the parliament. And I spoke there with a group of scholars and policymakers. And I just want to convey a very quick story to give you some food for thought. And I don't want to take away from Gunther's important lecture, but I just want to share this with you because I think it's important at many levels. In 2009, I spoke at the United Nations in Geneva. It was the Durban II conference. And the Durban II conference was on a panel discussion with legal scholars, including Erwin Kotler, who's the former Minister of Justice of Canada, and a human rights professor, law professor. And we spoke about incitement, international law and incitement. And we were speaking about how the Iranian revolutionary regime, not the people, but the regime, was inciting to genocide while it was trying to build, and is trying to build, a nuclear weapon. And we also spoke about how radical Islam, not Islam and not Muslims, but radical political Islam, was inciting to genocide against Jewish people. And I gave my talk there, and right after we were finished, it was on Yom HaShoah 2009. Yesterday I spoke at the United Nations in New York on Yom HaShoah. So in 2009, it was 2 hours before the president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, addressed the General Assembly in Geneva for the Durban II conference on Yom HaShoah. So there was a buzz in the building, and we had a lecture, and it was attended by a few hundred people. And I'd say about 100 of the 300 people in the room were from Iran, from guests of or workers with the regime. Anyways, as soon as I finished speaking, a group of Rwandans came to me and said, "We'd like to take you for a coffee." So I went. It turned out that there were a group of scholars and diplomats from the mission, the Rwandan mission in Geneva. They took me for a coffee in the cafeteria of the United Nations. And they basically said to me,
it's an honor to be invited to speak here. And Charles is one of the very few leading scholars working on anti-Semitism who take this that seriously. And you can be, I'm always surprised how few scholars take their research, what they find that anti-Semitism is the wish for murder, that they don't take it as serious as they should. So it's a great honor to speak here at this institute and in this place. I think we are few enough people to get into discussions. I won't run through all my presentation maybe, so I invite you to ask whenever you feel like that, and we can go into more discussions. I prepared some statistics and survey results and results from qualitative surveys. But please feel free to interrupt me and ask questions even during the lecture. I think that will be more lively. I think we have now a good hour. Is that correct? Until. All right. Good. So I want to talk about Europe and specifically anti-Semitism among Muslims in Europe. And I want to give you a little bit of background about Muslims in Europe. I don't know how familiar you are with Europe or with the different countries. There are Muslim minorities. Most Muslims in Europe live in one of the three countries, Germany, France, or the UK. And they have very different backgrounds. So in France, most of the Muslims, they come from North Africa, or the parents or grandparents come from North Africa, to be more precise. In the UK, that is rather from Pakistan, Bangladesh, or India. In
China, of England, of Germany stood up and said something similar, we would be outraged. And I'm amazed at the silence here. I'm a Canadian-Israeli scholar. I'm amazed. It's my humble opinion. So without further ado, it's really an honor.
Sorry,
Yes.
I don't know who you are. I'm not informed.
I'm sorry. My name is Charles Small. I'm the director of ISGAP, and ISGAP is running the program. Okay, so Gunther told me to cut short the introduction, so I will try to be brief. So Gunther is really, and I'm not saying this to be polite, a leading scholar from Europe. He earned his PhD at the Center for Research on Anti-Semitism at the Technical University of Berlin, which was one of the foremost centers on anti-Semitism, one of the first of not many. So it is and was an important center. Gunther is affiliated currently with the Moses Mendelssohn Center at the University of Potsdam and the group Société Religion La Cité, which is the CNRS, which is a prestigious research center in Paris. He was there actually from 2011 to 2012, and he served as an advisor on combating anti-Semitism to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. He has written on anti-Semitism widely, including discrimination of Muslims in Europe, issues of forced labor, and the perceptions of the Holocaust among Europeans. He recently published an important book entitled Perceptions of the Holocaust in Europe and Muslim Communities, which was published by Springer, an important publishing house in Germany. And his forthcoming book from the Indiana University Press is on Muslim anti-Semitism in Europe. He's currently spending the semester at Indiana University at the Justin Druck Family Visiting Scholarship Program at the ISGAP, and he's teaching a course there on anti-Semitism. So it's really a privilege and honor to have Gunther here with us this evening.
Thank you very much for this invitation.
That don't you understand what is happening to the Jews today in the Middle East and globally, this is 2009, is exactly what happened to us. They were Tutsis, and for months, for years leading up to the genocide in Rwanda, Hutu extremists were calling them non-human derogatory names like cockroaches and the like. And they said that this incitement, this dehumanization, lay the groundwork for the genocide in Rwanda, and the protocols of the Elders of Zion and what happened to the Jews in Europe for years leading up to the Holocaust is exactly what happened to them. It's exactly what happened to the Jews of Europe. And they said, don't you understand? This is exactly what's happening to you again, 2009. And they made me promise, and this is why I'm repeating the story in part, that when I go back to the United States to tell the human rights community, to tell the academic community, and to tell the Jewish community that they have to become active. And this was a group of Rwandans making me promise to tell American Jews to do something, that they couldn't believe that American Jews were so educated, so integrated economically, successfully integrated, and yet they remained silent. And this is 2009. Fast forward, 2014, I had the great honor yesterday of being at the United Nations to speak on Yom HaShoah on a panel. And part of my speech was reading the headlines from Al Jazeera, from Al Haram, from The Guardian, from The Telegraph, from Le Monde, and the words apartheid and Israel were in the global, international media of record, because they were quoting a leader, a major leader in the free Western world. On Yom HaShoah, and I said in the United Nations, that's an abomination. And we are going to hear a very important analysis. I know the work of Gunther well, he's a leading scholar. We're going to hear what's going on in the ground in Europe, and it's very important research. And we have a tendency in this country to look at Europe, to look at the Middle East, and to look at the problems around the world. But there's something happening here. If a leader of Russia